Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you with us. My name is Dahlia Habib-Linson. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the head of academic engagement at the Museum of Fine Arts, and I want to thank you for joining us for this program, Artist, Student, Curator. This is the second in a series of 3 sessions that draw in the perspectives of artists, students, and museum staff to reveal some of the critical questions, the structures and processes that underpin how museums operate. From how collections and exhibitions take shape to how audiences become engaged and narratives reinterpreted. Our first session last week explored how objects enter museum collections. Tonight, we shift our focus to looking at museum exhibitions and how they prompt new ways of considering objects. Our final session on April 15th will conclude by opening up a conversation on how museums participate in, reinforce, sometimes disrupt storytelling through objects and exhibitions. We want to remind you that registration for that last session is open now. Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to my wonderful colleague to introduce herself.
Thank you, Dahlia. So my name is Michelle Miller-Fisher. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Ronald C. and Anita L. Warnick Curator of Contemporary Decorative Arts at the MFA. Although I'm not physically there now, we want to acknowledge that the Museum of Fine Arts Boston was founded in 1870 and it stands on the historic homelands of the Massachusetts people. It's a site which has long served as a place of meeting and exchange among different nations. As a museum, we acknowledge the long history of the land we occupy today and seek ways to make Indigenous narratives more prominent in our galleries and programming. And as I'm an individual and not an institution, I acknowledge that as a Scottish person who's immigrated here, I take up space on land and in a country that is not mine. And so I actively engage in ways to respect and honor the histories, presence, and futures of its lands and peoples. We can all learn more about the Massachusetts people who continue to be the stewards of this land upon which the MFA was built by visiting massachusettstribe.org. I want to also take care of a few housekeeping things before we begin the program. Portions of the program will be recorded and available later as a recording. So when the recording is taking place, you're very welcome to turn off your video and to mute your audio in order not to be included if you want. Just to let you know that the majority of the film or the recording will only show the presenter, so you should be pretty safe. Back over to you, Dahlia.
Thank you, Michelle. And to add to those housekeeping items, I would like to remind everyone that a transcript and closed captions for the program are available through Rev4Zoom live captions. And you can enable those captions by going to the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, click the up arrow, and you'll see the closed caption as an option. You can also click on show subtitle to start displaying Rev live captions. We are going to do our best to try to say our name when a new speaker begins to help lend clarity to the transcript. And during the session, you're more than welcome and certainly encouraged to ask questions and share your comments through the Zoom's chat function or certainly through the raise hand function as well. We want to offer our gratitude, enormous thanks to Sophia Walter for her technical support for bringing so many of these elements for this program and so many more together, as well as our colleagues in the Department of Contemporary Art. And please feel free to chat with Sophia in the chat function if you need any help with today. And so I also want to remind you all that we very much rely on and welcome your feedback in this panel, as well as all of our online programs. So at the end of our session today, we will introduce a survey that we really encourage you to complete. Your responses help so much in the development of future programs for students, for academic audiences, and for all of our audiences as well. So today's program is organized as a panel discussion. You see here my name and that of Michelle, as well as our panelists, who will all introduce themselves. But we're really excited to think about tonight's program as a continuation of one that we launched first last summer, which explored how artists, designers, students, and curators were responding to the multiple crises of then and to some extent now as well, from the global health pandemic and related economic uncertainty to heightened social tensions around inequities resulting from ongoing racial injustice in the United States and across the globe. This spring, we continue the format of Artist, Student, Curator with a new set of questions, which aim to connect students and educators to forums for transparent conversations about how museums work and how that might and should change both now and in the future. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you, Dahlia. So the program strand that we have tonight, the second of 3 in a series, is also loosely related to an upcoming exhibition, which we're actually going to hear more about tonight because Kyla and Eben have been foundational parts of creating the exhibition. It's called New Light, Encounters and Connections, and it pairs around 20 new acquisitions to the MFA's collection with works from across the rest of the collection. So it's a way to spark conversations between objects that span eras, media, and ideas. We only have an hour this evening. We can't cover everything, so we're going to be guided by the expertise of our 3 speakers and the stories that they want to share, as well as the interest, of course, of you all in the audience. Back to you, Dahlia.
Thank you, Michelle. And if our conversation tonight is anything like the one we had last week, we'll have loads of new ideas for programs moving forward. So stay tuned. And we want to remind you that we seek to have a really transparent conversation tonight. So we welcome your participation, your questions, and your comments. And as Michelle noted, we won't be able to cover it all. We don't aim to have a conclusive or comprehensive view on exhibitions tonight, but what we do want to cover are some of the sort of core ideas, some of the basics. What are exhibitions, right? How do we understand these visual displays of artworks that tell a story in a museum made by a range of collaborators for the purpose of engaging and educating audiences, right? This sense of a description that is always historically and institutionally inflected. We want to think also about the logistics, the processes of design and collections care and construction that have to be attended to, this notion of pulling the curtain back and peering behind the walls, so to speak. We also want to think a little bit about the ethics of making exhibitions, who gets to make the decisions and whose work is shown and how. These are the issues that help uncover the complex histories of largely white dominant institutions, histories of colonialism as well. And we also want to think about the contemporary efforts underway toward creating and cultivating more just and inclusive museums, where objects and those who care for them and teach about them and make them reflect the communities around the institution and the wider society. We recognize it's a sort of ambitious agenda tonight, but we do want to talk about the cultural work of exhibitions and ways in which exhibitions seek to, in this context of the exhibition Michelle just described, recontextualize and reframe objects that have been decontextualized from their original contexts. So we want to explore really broadly to think about how exhibitions such as New Light, Encounters and Connections offer new ways of disrupting dominant narratives related to museum objects, exhibitions, and histories. So with that said, I'm really thrilled to turn it over to our fantastic panelists who will introduce themselves and share a little bit about why they very kindly agreed to share some time with us this evening, as well as their perspectives. So Eben, may I turn to you first?
Yeah. Hello, I'm Eben Haines. I'm an artist and I am the creator and co-curator for Shelter in Place Gallery. And I'm also a graphic designer for exhibitions at the Museum of Fine Arts.
Wonderful. And I will say we're so thrilled that we get something of a twofer in your participation tonight. We get to have that shared perspective, which is really exciting. Thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely. And Adriona, may I turn it over to you?
Of course, of course. So hello, everybody. My name is Adriona King. I currently attend Bunker Hill Community College, and I'm majoring in visual design. I was also an intern at the MFA for about 3 months, and I'm here today to just share some insight on the Traveling Exhibitions program. And yeah, so that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I mean, I know how much you have going on, all students, right? So it is quite a lot to take on a whole other project. So we so appreciate your time and participation and perspective. Kyla, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kyla Hygysician, and I'm a designer at the MFA. I'm part of a team of 8. Eben and I are part of a team of 8, in which I'm a 3D designer, Eben's a graphic designer, and then we also have production people. And I'm excited to be part of this series and to talk about the field of museum exhibition design with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyla, for joining us as well. We know that everyone has a lot going on right now, certainly within and outside of the museum. So creating this time and sharing your perspective and your expertise is very much appreciated. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first set of slides and to my collaborator, Michelle, to have a conversation with Eben.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dahlia. It's great to be in everybody's company this evening. I'm going to have to keep a really close eye on the clock because I could talk to all three of our speakers all evening. I'm not kidding. And most of the time, actually, in my day job, I get to speak to Eben and to Kyla quite a lot because we work together. So I'm going to contain myself and stick to the questions that we've prepared, Eben. Eben, there's so much that we could talk about in terms of exhibitions because you approach it in such a multifaceted way. But tonight we're talking to you from really the perspective of your identity as an artist. So for those who perhaps don't know Shelter in Place or don't know the backstory to it, could you talk a little bit about how you came to build your own gallery and start making your own exhibitions in your home?
Yeah, so it didn't actually start as a gallery per se. This was kind of a few years ago, kind of a rainy day project where I wanted to have a backdrop for a place where I could house these little maquettes of larger work that I wanted to make, but obviously didn't have the space in my studio or the money to produce them. And I kind of got halfway through building it and thought this was a really great idea, and then got bored with it and stuck it in the corner to gather dust for about a year. But once the pandemic started and the museum closed down, and I had to basically move everything out of my studio, and I thought it would be a good thing to bring home and finally get to making those maquettes that I always wanted to make. But very quickly, working from my little desk in my apartment, my fiance and I realized that pretty much every other artist in the city is in this exact same situation. And so we decided that we could use this as a place to not only give artists a place to show their work when everything is closed, but also to give them an opportunity to make something that is far beyond anything that they could make normally because of financial and space constraints. So basically give them an opportunity to make the most ambitious thing that they've ever done at a time when the world is shrunk and become inaccessible.
And you basically outdid me in terms of my job. I'm a contemporary curator, and at the moment in time where I could not make an exhibition for love nor money, I turned on Instagram. I was like, wait, this is amazing. And then of course it was your project. And so at a moment in time where it was really difficult to see any other kind of artwork, you really created a paradigm where it was possible to show. I know that you really stuck to offering shows to artists from the Boston area and its surrounds. So it really was about sort of nurturing a local ecosystem, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, which is in part because I wanted to, it started as just friends and family doing this, and we never expected it to be anything more than that. And so it was very local just because of that. And then at the same time, at the very beginning of things, we were all kind of afraid of the post office and of the packages coming in our houses and what they could have on them. And so being able to drop things off directly on our doorstep was really easy for people nearby. But eventually we just got so many submissions from outside of the Boston area that we decided we needed to open it up and let more people in.
So you are very much involved in the exhibition making process at the MFA, Eben, through your work primarily as a graphic designer in that department. So you know the exhibition making process pretty much inside out. What was different when it came to working at home in Shelter in Place? What were the most rewarding aspects of it, and what were the hardest aspects of putting an exhibition together in a space like Shelter in Place?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the biggest differences I think is that the artist can't actually be in the room with me while we're hanging their show, and so it's either just like sending pictures back and forth and deciding on things like that, or sometimes we get on like a video call. But when you're using the phone to photograph things and also be in a video, it became really difficult. I think probably the most rewarding thing that we've seen is just the amazing quality of work that's come in with the submissions and the wide breadth of subject matter, and just, I don't know, the work that we get in that comes in every day is just like so phenomenal. And it's so difficult to have to parse through and, pick our favorites. And in the end, as much as we try not to be gatekeepers, it does end up just being like, this is what makes me feel something, and this is my favorite, and this is what we end up putting up. But another wonderful thing is so many artists have told us that this is just kind of completely changed their practice and their way of seeing their work. A lot of people who did make large things and had to figure out how to make their large work little to fit in the gallery, and then they started making tons of little work because they're like, this is amazing, I can get so many ideas out, it's so much faster, and then also people can actually afford my work now, because as many of us know, it's hard to make work that is affordable when you're trying to make the work that you really want to make. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We can take a look at some more slides actually. Sophia, if you would mind just going gently through a couple of the slides. So this was the first show in Shelter in Place, right, Eben? Or
yes,
early show.
Three paintings by my father, Eben Haines,
who is an amazing painter at full scale as well as at miniature. And then I think, Sophia, we have another couple of slides. Yeah, so this is Nicole Denebier's work, another painter, right, Eben?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no, which are phenomenal. I mean, she also works large, but at the same detail level. So they're just really beautiful kind of Northern Baroque style paintings of piles of dead things, basically.
And we should say, so we are lucky enough at the MFA to have acquired Shelter in Place, so your work as the gallery, and we'll be having that as part of the New Light Encounters and Connections exhibition. And in it, we will have some of the work that has been produced by artists from some of your exhibitions. So we acquired alongside your gallery, Shelter in Place. We also acquired a work by Nicole, and then another work by an artist called Alison Crony-Moses. And I think we can see Alison's work just here. So it's this beautiful, fantastic wood piece. Alison is also a program director at the Elliott School for Fine and Applied Craft, Fine and Applied Art, I should say. And so she works at larger scale in wood too, but made this really beautiful, tiny little vessel. And then I think, Eben, we have one more slide, right? Yes. So do you want to talk about these or shall I?
You probably know a lot more about them. I'm very excited about these little miniature vases though.
Yeah, well, we should give a shout out to our amazing colleague, Courtney Harris in the Art of Europe department. She's a curator who has been working for many years tracking the many miniatures at the museum in the MFA's collection. And one set of miniatures are these miniature vases by Auguste Delaherche, who was a French 19th century and early 20th century ceramicist. And he made these very small vessels to test out the glaze that he would then put onto larger vessels. But he marked each one of these separately, so he saw them as miniature artworks in their own right. So they're going to be next to Alison's rather wonderful wood vessel in the Shelter in Place gallery when it's shown at the MFA. Eben, how do you toggle between your identities as an artist and as a designer? How does it go back and forth for you? And maybe how do you toggle between working at larger scale in the museum and then at smaller scale in your own project with Shelter in Place?
Yeah, I guess a lot of it's based on deadlines, kind of, because I have at least 4 days a week, there has to be a post on Instagram, which means that things have to get done up to that point so that we can actually post work. And then at work, everything's based around the schedules of the museum. And then after work, I go into the studio and I have certain deadlines that I have to hit. And so I know how long this painting probably takes. And so I need to be here for at least 3 nights this week to get this done. But luckily, kind of all 3 hats get worn in the same day. And so there's just a lot of overlap in the things that I do, and everything kind of influences each other. So it doesn't always feel like wearing 3 different hats. But one of the main differences between doing the exhibitions at Shelter in Place as opposed to the museum is that my fiance Delaney and I are doing this all on our own. We make a lot of jokes about how our registrars are really angry at us for doing whatever, and we try to make it seem like it is a much bigger kind of institution, just so that to point out the fact that art is never a singular thing. Like it is always a community effort, and always takes way more people than you would ever expect to make anything happen. And so working at the museum, it is great to live in that world where I get to talk to the people who help make everything work and work closely with them.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself. Exhibition making is a complete team effort. There's nothing that happens without a group of people coming together. So I'm really excited to see this team effort manifest at the MFA in the New Light exhibition. And if people want to see more of Shelter in Place online, they can through Instagram. Shelter in Place Gallery is the handle. And it's a fantastic, you have a really great copy editor, Evan and Delaney. I love the way that you make your posts. And also we're going to get to see some work of yours in many different ways at the ICA pretty soon too. We should give a shout out to our amazingly prescient and wonderful colleagues there, because you're a Foster Prize nominee. So many congratulations on that. It's brilliant news.
Thank you so much. That'll be August 25th. So I have to start busting my butt.
I know you can do it. Adriona and Dalia, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Eben. And I think ending on that note that you so beautifully did, Eben, on the collaborative nature of these structures is really important. And I think it's one of the ways in which we hope to highlight how museums work so necessarily collaboratively. And I think it's definitely one of the aims of this series, is to really think carefully about how that happens. I'm sorry, here we go. So I'm going to get to this slide as we turn our attention to Adriana. So Adriana, hello again. Thank you again for being here. You came to the museum internship with not a lot of understanding about how the institution worked on the inside, right? Mm-hmm. And your internship was exclusively remote due to the pandemic. So I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about your experience as an intern, and share with us a little bit about what you found to be most compelling, exciting about exhibitions. You know, what did you learn about exhibitions in general, and maybe how traveling exhibitions was different?
Okay. I guess I'll start off by saying why I wanted to intern at the MFA.
Yeah.
So at my school, they were promoting different internships, and I saw that the MFA was offering a opportunity for, I believe, 3 different interns or maybe 2 interns to see what they do behind the scenes. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I never really was interested in the MFA before, in museums in general, but I thought this is a really great opportunity to see what they do and how they collaborate and communicate with each other. So I applied for the traveling exhibitions program just to see how they work with also other museums and other institutions to portray different works and different exhibitions. So that's the first bit. And remind me of the rest, just how my experience was overall remotely.
Yeah, share with us a little bit about your experience, and what did you find really interesting or really different about that experience? How did it sort of meet your expectations, or how were your expectations changed by the internship?
Okay, so for the internship, I was a bit worried that I wasn't, how do I word this properly? But I was worried that I wasn't able to help the museum as a whole. I know coming in, I'm somebody who has no knowledge of the museum. How can I possibly help them with their goals, or push forward the narratives they want to portray for the public? And I feel during my time there, I just really learned how everyone works together and really helps each other, and being able to just communicate and express their vision for each exhibition. Mm-hmm. Exclusively, yeah. So sorry, I'm a bit nervous.
No,
so
you're
don't mind me.
No, it's really wonderful, and I think it's something that often a lot of students don't know about, is how much it takes to organize exhibitions, and that was something that you got such direct access and knowledge to in terms of how it worked and the timeline. So when you were working through this process, what initially seemed to you to be most complex, or something that you didn't know about, or something that was sort of illuminating to you about traveling exhibitions?
There were there's a few of them, but if I had to name some, I would say what was it? Budgeting is one, and also conservation, object conservation. I never realized how much planning and how much like just communicating with other departments, it's really crazy. I wish, let me give an example actually. So when I was talking with my supervisor, I was asking her, hey, how does like the museum make sure they have enough funds, enough money for each object and like for traveling expenses and stuff like that. And she really showed me the her Excel sheet and the amount of work she has to put into it and how many people she has to interact with just to make sure everything goes planned. And she also has to do a lot of what if scenarios, like what happens if a truck breaks down, or what happens if a piece of work just fell into the ocean. Like it's not stuff I would have thought about if I had not been part of the internship. And I thought that was really eye-opening. I'm like, wow, there's so much consideration that goes into planning. And also like budgeting and making sure objects get through what they need to get through.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I think sometimes we have this perception that exhibitions sort of fall from the sky, completely done with the paint on the walls, right? And thanks to Kyla and Eben, sometimes it seems completely seamless and perfect how that happens. And I think that the internship that you had maybe provided a window into that process and how complex and sometimes really messy that process can be and sort of how long it takes. And with that, I wonder if you might share with us a little bit about what you learned in terms of how a general timeline for an exhibition comes together.
So if you move over to the next slide,
Sure.
I believe I have 3 of these slides so there's about like 12 phases that me and my supervisor, with the help of my supervisor, that we came up with just as like a general what exactly or how exactly exhibition starts and then how it ends and like just the middle stuff. So first it'd be like the project conception, and then you'd go over to like curatorial narrative and object checklist development. And then we go over to object conservation and logistics. And also, hold on, I have to move and also we'd have like crucial elements. And if you move forward, I won't go into like too much detail. If anybody wants me to go back, and of course I'll talk about it. But next would be like budgeting, and then the fee. And then you can't forget about the research. And then also you got to think about outreach. And if you go over to the next slide. Also, there's negotiation with other institutions. And then there's production and project management. There's also the venue marketing and the PR and the MFA approval. And then finally, we have like the venue logistics.
Yeah, it's really terrific. And the way that you've outlined it in such a clear way that really creates a kind of understanding of the entire process is so helpful, I think, to visualize. So thank you for doing that. And when you got a sense for what traveling exhibitions were, did you, how did that understanding compare to what you knew about exhibitions at the MFA before your internship? What was unique, in other words, about the traveling exhibitions program that you learned about?
Just like, for me personally, just the amount of work and the amount of like communication that goes with like talking with other people who work at different museums and also different institutions. Because obviously for a regular exhibition, well, I shouldn't say obviously, because I obviously didn't know about it to begin with, but like for like regular exhibitions, I knew beforehand, like obviously internal departments work together and they collaborate, they hold meetings to see, oh, what goes here, or like what is going to be the main subject for that exhibition. But in terms of like traveling, it's like you also have to think about your clients and what other museums are also doing the same narratives or similar narratives. Also like the timeline, like, oh, when do we do that? And also you got to make sure same thing with the regular one too, but like the objects that are going to go into the exhibition itself. I just think in terms of the traveling exhibitions, it's just really about time, just planning out everything and making sure all the clients and everybody working together on that project can maintain sustained communication just so the project goes through, so the public can see the narrative or the story that should be shared.
That's really, really great. And I think that your perspective on this as a student coming in is so enlightening for so many of us in the audience to learn about. And I wonder if you could help us think through, as you reflect upon your experience at the MFA, are there aspects of this process or the sort of timeline of an exhibition, the life of an exhibition, so to speak, that you think could be different in some way?
Honestly, I don't know how to answer that, but like, if I were to give you an answer,
What's that?
Sorry.
No, I mean, go ahead.
No, I'll say something. I think just having transparency and like just showing everybody like what actually happens. Like, so, for example, this program right here, I think this is a nice starting point to showing like everybody like, hey, what's actually happening behind the walls, you know, like what is each department doing? Like, how do they plan each step? And I think that's really interesting. And if you had this when I was younger, I'd be like, oh, wow, that's it. Like they just really work together, just as normal people talking with each other and planning stuff. Wow. Yeah.
It's really great. Yeah, it's really lovely. And now that we have you, you're going to stay connected to us forever, right?
Yes, of course.
That's really great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that as we turn our attention after Kyla's portion, we will have questions as well. So please stick around for that. So Michelle and Kyla, may I turn it over to you?
Yeah, thank you both so much. That was an amazing conversation. And Adriona, we have a number of people really interested in your slides in the chat. And so if you'd be willing to share them, or we can come back to them later on in the program, but we'll make sure that we go back over them or share them somehow, because they are so brilliant in terms of really breaking down, as you say, the ways in which teams work together and make it very transparent and legible about how that work comes together for an exhibition, and in particular, a traveling exhibition. But Kyla, we're so excited to have you here. Thank you for speaking with us. You're one of my very favorite people to work with at the museum. I think I'm really fortunate that I get to work with you so much. You're kind of stuck with me an awful lot. We can talk about the relationship of a curator and an exhibition designer maybe in the Q&A. I want to ask in a second how you came to do your job, but I have two questions before that. First one is, what's your favorite thing about your job? What do you love the most about it? What really kind of sets your heart on fire, even during the very toughest times of it?
Well, I think seeing it all come together, I think whenever you're presented with a project, the curator comes to you, you're assigned a space and you get an object list, and the curator has their ideas. So there's there's months to years sometimes of planning to seeing how the space can take shape and how you can create this visitor experience to really relay the story that the curator is trying to tell. And then ultimately, and we're about at this stage with the New Light exhibition, you get to the construction phase, and that's when the space really starts to take shape, and all these little decisions that you've been making and problems you've been solving over the planning period start to come together. And it's really rewarding to see everything come together. And then you finally get to the installation and the art goes on the walls. And it's just really rewarding to see the process and come to the final product.
Yeah.
And then I guess like also then as an extra to that is then you get to watch people go through the space and see how they experience it.
Yeah, I love that sort of thought of it coming together, because it really it is a process of something coming slowly into focus. Like there's no, at least I find it as a curator, maybe you find it different as an exhibition designer, but as you say, you sort of start with being given a space or a gallery in the museum, and that gives you one set of parameters. Is it, a really large space? Is it a really small space? Does it have natural light in it? Does it not? Like how does it feel? Where in the museum is it? Is it right at the entrance? Do people have to like dig to find it? All of those things sort of shape the exhibition design considerations.
Yeah, I think we need to be in mute mode. I was just going to make a comment.
There we go. Fantastic. Welcome though. And so, and then you get an object list, and that can change, right? I mean, it probably drives you nuts because it does change, Kyla. But the object list can be added to over time as new research happens. And so what can start off as 20 objects can become 40 objects over the course of a conversation, although it really shouldn't ever be. We should be coming to an exhibition designer with a set checklist, but that doesn't always happen. So I guess the question that I want to ask is a second question, which wasn't on our list for tonight, but somebody in the audience suggested it, and it's a really smart one. Meredith emailed a question beforehand, and she said she wants to sort of think about how you come to conceptualize and create the environment. Like, what's the process of inspiration? So do you have a mood board? Do you look at the space? Do you think about other exhibitions that you've seen before? Like, what is it that really drives the initial stages of the design process when it's still pretty much a blank canvas? Is it talking with the curator? Is it diving into the research if it's the artist? Like, where do you start? What's the really like the beginning phase?
It can kind of be all of the above, but generally for me, I think it really starts with the conversation with the curator and what the curator is really envisioning and what the story is that they're trying to tell. We want the space to support the story and not distract from it. So sometimes creating a really like enveloping environment is called for, and sometimes, and especially sometimes with contemporary work, really putting something minimal out there that the work can really just stand on the wall. And also, particularly when we work with a range of work across the museum and cultures, and also historical versus contemporary. So sometimes when it's contemporary, the artist, you'll hear from the artist and you'll know what their intention is, which often drives. But usually we do the research on the work, and that really drives, like in this show here, the idea. And this show is, I think, this show is a little bit unique in that I was given a space. The architecture was a given. I wasn't able to build any walls for this show, but you can see the curved platforms were derived from looking at the Memphis furniture on the platform on the left, and that really kind of sparked the idea. I went with the geometry of that, and that's what helped inform the language of the platforms in the show.
Yeah, I love what you've added here. So we're looking here at two galleries that have sort of been conjoined for the New Light exhibition that we're working on. They are two gallery spaces on the ground floor of the museum. And they will have the exhibition that I was describing earlier on New Light in it, where we have contemporary acquisitions talking to artworks from across the museum's collections. So spanning eras, spanning media, spanning different cultures. And I love the way that you've brought into what is quite a rectilinear space, Kyla, a lot of different curves, whether it's part of the railings, and you can see these sort of half semicircles, so the stanchions that protect the artwork but sort of offer this break in the wall, or as you say in the very far left here, the kind of island that you can see, which has different works on it there. What we're looking at here, what's the software that you're using here, Kyla? So you and I and other curators will often, especially now that we're remote and we can't be sitting together at a table looking at plans, you'll bring this up on your workspace. You can zoom into different parts of it, and that's how you design a lot of the time, right? And that's how we have a conversation about design. Yeah,
it's interesting because in some ways, working remotely at home has changed the process my process with curators a little bit. But we work in Vectorworks, and Vectorworks is a CAD drawing program that from what I can tell, it's used by all exhibition designers as far as I know. It can be used by architects, but it seems to primarily be something that's used by exhibition designers. And I think that that's because it's a nice balance of a technical drawing, but also the ability to bring images in. So I think of it as it kind of has some elements of the Adobe programs that allow you to sort of combine the technical drawing with Illustrator and images that you need to do to figure out the elevations and the details of the exhibition.
Yeah, and I think if we go to the next slide, we can see some of those elevations, I think. So this is part of the New Light exhibition and what you create digitally, so we can have these conversations between curator and exhibition designer. And I think, I mean, I know as a curator, now that I have hung many shows in many spaces, I have a better sense of like how objects exist in space and how we come towards them as visitors. I know that that is always, though, mediated far better through my conversations with an exhibition designer. I know that you said curators come with the idea, Kyla, but I've yet to actually ever meet the curator whose idea hasn't been made better by the exhibition designer, usually extremely diplomatically, but really helpfully. And it's always the exhibition designer that actually ends up really creating the space in the powerful way that people then experience it as an exhibition. Do you feel that you can sort of see the way that you've developed as a designer as well over the last 10 years of working in this way? Like you have gained more skills or picked up confidence, or you just have a way now that you really kind of understand things that maybe has changed from the very start?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, you learn from experience. I always say, like, one thing that's cool about this, my training is in architecture, but one thing that's different about exhibition design versus building a building is, you know, these are temporary exhibitions that are up for sometimes a year, but sometimes around there, like 6 to 9 months. And then they get taken down. So you can kind of like, you learn from your experiences and then you get to do it again. So there is this process of knowing, at this point, I kind of know that, like, okay, you need a minimum of 10 feet for this to feel comfortable, or this type of object needs to be viewed at a certain height in order to be comfortable. Things like that, you just kind of learn from. And also, I know, like, my colleagues and I, we can't walk through another museum without, like, looking underneath the case and being like, how did they make that? Or just like we can't go anywhere without sort of just like looking at the underbelly of everything and thinking and learning from that as well. So
yeah, my husband gets very mad with me because when we go to museums, I take very odd pictures from very different angles of an exhibition space, never with anybody else in it. I just want to see how somebody has designed a part of it. So yeah, it's lovely being able to see other people doing great work too. The very last question I have for you is actually one that somebody else in the audience has as well. How did you end up doing the job that you're doing? Like, what was your path to doing, to becoming an exhibition designer? When did you even know that existed as a job?
Well, my undergraduate degree is in art history, and so that's how I got into museum work. I came directly from undergrad. I worked in a curatorial department in the Asian art department, actually at the MFA, as their department assistant for a couple of years. And that really opened up my eyes to a lot of fields within the museum that I think that I didn't even know existed. And one of them was exhibition design. And I sort of also had this interest in architecture throughout undergrad as well. And so I learned about the exhibition design department, and it seemed like a great combination. I did leave the museum and went to St. Louis to get a master's in architecture. And then I ended up coming back to work in the design department.
Fantastic. And so you've been at the MFA for about 10 years. So you really are a specialist exhibition designer at this point in time. And I know that we love, so it's a great big team of people working on this show. As Eben said, like, nothing like this happens without a huge team. There's 2 fantastic curators in my department, my colleagues, Deborah and Marina. There's a whole review group of other curators and designers and interpretive specialists who have been really fundamental in coming together as a group to think about the checklist. So there's probably about like 40, 43, 44 works on the exhibition checklist. And then many other people at the museum whose role it is in some way or another to welcome visitors to this space, or to, you know, make sure the space is secure, make sure it's cleaned, like so many other people who make this space happen and function as an exhibition. I know that there are some questions now in the chat, and Dahlia, is this a good moment in time for us all to come back together and to answer some of them?
I think so. I think this is a good time. I haven't looked at the chat, but I'm happy to pull it up here.
Fantastic. Do you want me to start with one question? You have a look through and pick the second question. Is that helpful? Fantastic. So I'm going to work from the bottom up, and there was a great question about education paths and becoming an exhibition designer that you very kindly answered just there, Kyla. So I'm going to skip up to Emily, who asks, does the associated theme or story assigned to the exhibition evolve as you work through the process of creating it, or is that relatively set? So that's a good question to ask all 3 people on our panel, actually, because you all have different responses to it, I think. But who wants to start? I'm going to throw that to Kyla, maybe. Is that okay?
Sure. And I think actually Eben and I are also working on a show called Fabric of a Nation, a quilt show. And that's like a really good example of a show that has evolved over time. And part of it is that, you know, the theme of the show is talking about how quilts are a good medium for people to get their voice across and tell stories through. It's a very accessible medium. And so over the last year, the show was originally supposed to have opened last October. And so as the world has turned upside down in the past year, like I could, if I were to show you the plans of the show, it's also, the show has migrated through the uncertainty of the past year at the museum into 4 different galleries. But also that just, it's changed so dramatically. We now have people making quilts about COVID. There's people making quilts about Black Lives Matter. So we have really just like made, I feel like we always say every time we redesigned it, we've made it better, but we've made it so much more relevant. It's really been a great opportunity to see that.
I'm super excited for that exhibition, by the way. It's going to be a really great one. So yeah, I'm excited. Eben or Adriona, do either of you want to respond to that question? Or if not, I think there's one about interns, which might be a good one to go to next. Oh, and Elizabeth's asking, when do you expect the exhibit to open? Quilt is opening later this year, right, Kyla and Eben? You know the
I think it's October 6th, is that right?
That sounds about right. We'll also find it online and we'll put a link to it in the chat so that you so that we do have a good date for you, Elizabeth. Adriona, you were going to say something there.
Yeah, I was going to say I can answer the question about the internship. And also I saw it throughout the chat that people liked the slides. If you don't mind, I'm willing to share the link so everyone can just go look at it at their own time. Is that okay?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adriana. Well done on the slides. No wonder everyone likes them so much because they're fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah, just let me know if there's trouble. I just shared it. Hopefully, yeah. And you can ask the question about the intern because I believe Christina asked one. I'm not sure if any others did too.
Yeah, it would be wonderful to hear from your point of view, Adriana, in terms of how your work as an intern fit into the processes and work with everyone. Can you share with us a little bit about how that worked? And certainly, as we've talked about before, your internship had to be fully remote, right, due to the pandemic. But can you share with us a little bit about what it was like to interface with different folks from the museum?
For me, I thought it was like really easy, super simple. Basically, I just attended meetings through Zoom, and also I was able to participate. I took a bunch of notes. I heard everyone discuss the materials and like work together. Also, they used Trello to communicate and also like really have everything under control for like project management and such. So I felt like, I mean, I know everyone was struggling transitioning over like fully remotely, but you wouldn't have thunk it if you were there. Like everyone was really on top of like just communicating with each other through Trello and also through email and through the Zooms. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's great. Well, I know that you were really, really flexible in adapting to so many different kinds of changes that that you experienced in the course of your internship. And I think that in some ways, as strained and sometimes challenging as Zoom work can be, I think it also maybe provided some interesting opportunities to think about aspects of museum work in different ways, and maybe made the possibility of meeting with different colleagues from the museum a little bit easier as well.
I have a question for Eben in the chat from Priscilla. It's a really great one. Eben, Priscilla is asking, are there any insights or extra understandings that you have from experiencing both the artist and the gallery sides of the museum? I think that's a really good question because your work was obviously acquired by the museum. So you've gone through that process of acquisition. You've had to deal with the museum as an institution reaching out and being interested in your work. And then every single day you deal with artists living and passed away who you're dealing with their work and putting it in an exhibition context. So looking for insights or extra understanding.
Yeah.
As transparent as you like.
It's funny, I always have heard that like it's just so difficult working with living artists, and especially since we're at an encyclopedic museum, which has a lot of work by dead people. A lot of departments never have to work with a living artist, and so when they do, they realize how difficult it is, because a living artists can talk back and tell you, no, you did that wrong, and it's not how that should be. So it's fun to be able to be myself on that side of things and know, like, I know what you want this to be, but it's not that. And like how my work was not built to be something that lasted more than, as long as it took to photograph whatever is inside of it. And so going to the museum and having to be something that lasts, there was a lot of work before it was actually acquired, that I had to like shore things up and make sure that it wasn't all going to fall apart at the last minute. Yeah, and then so also working now that I'm working with Jeff Dubois at the ICA for my Foster Prize show, it's interesting to think about. I know exactly what, not exactly what, but I know what museums are looking for and what the pinch points are, what the more difficult things are of showing work is in a museum, and how to go through the bureaucracy of it. So a lot of the things that I'm creating and a lot of the ways that I'm building things are ways that I probably wouldn't normally build it, except that I know that it's going into a museum and it has to be a certain way in order to just get in the door.
Can you give a concrete example of that, Eben? Because I think that's really true. And it goes back to something that Adriona was saying too about conservation. Conservation colleagues in a museum are people who are some of the most well-qualified people I ever come across, because they have to know art history. They also have to know organic chemistry, and they have to do tons of fellowships to get a conservational job. So they're ridiculously qualified people. And they often are they're crucial to the workings of the museum, because when something comes into the museum, we have to take care of it like it was, a swaddled infant. It has to leave the museum, if it's alone, exactly how it came in, or if it's coming into the collection, we agree to look after it in perpetuity forever. And so what I think you're saying is sort of about the materials. Sometimes conservators are often really saying, we want something to be of enough of a material that will last, of something that's not going to fall apart, that's not too ephemeral.
Yeah, absolutely. Which if you look at like an old it was built before they even made the penny. It was built to last for at least a couple hundred years. Whereas now, we use a lot of industrial products in art making, and a lot of things that honestly we don't know how they age, because they haven't existed for more than 20 years or whatever. So it's interesting to think about building things, kind of using things that how it's going to age, and making it so that it can actually travel, and so that it's I mean, a lot of my work is like very fragile, or supposed to look very fragile, but having to make things that look fragile while also making them so that the registrars and conservators aren't going to despise ever working with my stuff is a pretty difficult situation.
That's really great. So I think with the time that we have left, it looks like we may have one question for Kyla and one for Adriona. Yeah. So we might begin by thinking a little bit through the design process. Kyla, there's a question from Mary about the decisions, and maybe this is a sort of intersectional question between curatorial and design. So maybe both Michelle and Kyla could address it. When you're thinking about the placement of objects, how do you decide the placement of each piece within the show in a sort of non-pandemic world, especially with large pieces that may be difficult to move around? So how do you think through those spatial intricacies?
Well, first we start on paper through Vectorworks, and that's the easiest way to move around, I guess. And then you're also considering like how you approach the work as you move through the space. You want something that's very like powerful to draw you through an exhibition. You're considering the needs of the piece. Like some pieces are more fragile, and so maybe they need a little bit of a more protected space. Some things are really delicate. They're very intricate in there. So maybe like a fine drawing that you might want to hang a little bit lower. So it's easier to see, and vice versa with a large painting, we might end up hanging it a little bit higher. So It starts, through the process. We kind of know these things and can anticipate some of these things. It's a process of working on paper. Sometimes we make physical models, and then going into the space. And we try, and often if something's very big, rather than handling an object too much, we'll print out a full scale mock-up that we can tape on the wall.
Really great. So, and sometimes you get to play make believe, and sometimes it comes together. And I imagine it's a process of continual recalibration to move the process along.
I often think about one or two or three objects on the checklist being anchor works, ones that I feel really, really have a story to tell that's important to the overall story, but also ones that have a visual impact. And then exactly what Kyla was saying, there are sight lines. When you come into a space, what do you see when you immediately enter? What do you see when you turn to the right? What do you see when you turn to the left? What do you see at the very end that leaves you with the impression at the end of the exhibition? Not that people often plow a unidirectional path at all through space. In fact, it's completely the opposite. But being able to find that one anchor work, which is the thing that people see as they enter or as they move into a specific sightline, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's certainly one thing to design and orchestrate on paper or digitally, and it's quite another to be in the physical space itself.
Absolutely.
It's really, really wonderful. So Adriana, there's a couple questions for you regarding, there's a question from Ruth. Tell us a little bit about how your internship has shaped how you think about museums, or the MFA in particular. And maybe to finish us out, tell us what your thoughts are in terms of what's next for you after the internship.
So after my internship, for me, I find museums a lot less intimidating now, because I believe, like, when I was younger, I just thought, I don't know, museums aren't really for me. It's more for people who are really about sophisticated art. But it's just regular people working to portray certain stories in an exhibition, and that's really it. And now that I experienced that and I've actually helped work with those people, yeah, the museum is just a place for artwork, and anybody could really go. And I have no idea why I felt so intimidated all those years, really, honestly. And then next, I honestly just want to finish my degree and also transfer to a 4-year and then get a BFA. And after that, I'm not really too sure. We'll see.
It's really, really great for you to share that with us, Adriana. And I think that's so much a part of the story of the sense of mystery that museums seem to have. And I think being able to kind of pull that curtain back and demystify a little bit can, I think, help us to become a more inclusive institution and to look forward to really being critical about the kinds of questions that we ask and the stories that we tell. So that's really, really helpful. I know we've got a couple minutes left, so I might just pop this into or sort of direct this to all of our panelists. And I don't know if anyone has the answer to this, but I'm wondering if someone could share their thoughts on what they think the most recent acquisition has been at the museum. Michelle, would you argue that it's probably part of that group of works by 24 artists?
Yeah, absolutely. So the short explanatory answer is we have regular meetings called acquisition committee meetings that happen about 3 or 4 times during the year. And so the most recent one happened in February. And at each of these meetings, all of the curatorial departments have said to the board and other folks who look at acquisition proposals, we'd like to acquire X works, and they are usually approved at that meeting. And so there's usually like cohorts of objects that come into the museum. Everything does have to go through a committee meeting, so things can't sort of come in helter-skelter. They do come in these waves. So the most recent acquisitions are from February. There's another acquisition meeting coming up in April, and there might be 1 or 2 works from even April actually making their way into this exhibition. So some of the most recent works, if you look up fantastic ceramic artist called Nick Lenker, I'm totally using this question to talk about the artists that I particularly love, but there's many, many artists that you could look up. Nick Lenker is certainly one of them. And then Samantha Nye, a really fantastic painter based in Philadelphia. Nick's in Philadelphia actually as well. So those are 2 works that definitely will be in new light and came in the last couple of months of acquisition committee meetings.
Terrific. That gives us a lot to look forward to with this exhibition coming up as well, and helpful to keep in mind that the institution is ever evolving. So it is 6:30, so we are officially at time, and I want to remind everyone that we are really eager to get your feedback. So tell us what you thought of the program. If you have ideas for future programs, share that with us. Our colleague Sophia has put into the chat a link to the survey. We are really delighted to hear your feedback. And I just want to, again, thank all of our panelists for your insights and your expertise and your terrific feedback and for sharing with us and helping us all learn together.
Yeah,
So
thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Bye.
And thank you everyone for coming. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you to the amazing audience. See you for our next one on April 15th.